Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Monday night Sonar Masterclass. Thanks to Lawrence, and with us today is Paul Malov. Welcome along, Paul. Nice to see you, mate.
Thanks, Greg. Great to see you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, look, it's exciting to have you here because we've chatted before on the podcast. You're a bit of a Brim specialist. I don't know all that much about Brim fishing, mate. So looking forward to picking your brains, not just about sonar, but about Brim fishing in general. So a good opportunity to do that. And we've had a few people that have submitted some questions, so that'll be great. I know we've got a lot of people that have contacted me during the week saying they're looking forward to coming along to this one. So we're going to give them a few minutes or so, mate, to get into the room.
Perfect. Sounds good.
And let this live stream get going. It takes a few minutes for it to reach full swing. So, mate, let's have a bit of a chat about Brim fishing in your part of the world. So you're based in Melbourne.
I am, yeah. I'm Metro Melbourne, yeah.
And the key species down there, black Brim. Do you get yellowfin in Melbourne as well, or do they sort of stop Gippslandish area?
Exactly, yeah, spot on. So down in Melbourne, we predominantly, the main Brim species is the black Brim. We don't get the yellowfin coming down this far across. Like you said, they kind of stop at Gippsland, potentially Sale. Sale's about probably as far east as they might reach. You might get the occasional one at Wilson's Prom, but here in Melbourne, in Port Phillip Bay and Metro Melbourne, it's always the black Brim for us.
Yeah. Now, we've got a few guys already starting to fire up and send us a few questions, Paul. So, folks, what I'll get you to do, we're just going to chit-chat for a little bit. I'm going to have a fly land on my face. We're going to chit-chat for a little bit. Got to love live TV, hey? Just while things get going and people come into the room. But what I'd like you to do, guys, if you're listening in or watching the stream today, let us know where you're coming from. So we've got Rob Berlin. Yes, mate, we are. It is working. Zdenko, welcome along, mate. Scott Slater, Ben Martin. Now, Zdenko and Scott have posted some questions there, Paul, so we might come back to those a bit later on. We're going to have plenty of time to talk about lots of stuff. Some of these questions are not necessarily going to be about sonar, but that's okay. So if you've got some general Brim fishing questions, we're happy to talk about those as well. So, mate, black Brim in winter down in Melbourne, it's pretty cool down there. Do the fish keep biting right through the cooler months, or do they slow down a little bit?
Definitely gets tough down here, Greg, especially Metro, and this is what I wanted to talk about tonight on the show. If you go east or west of Melbourne, you definitely the fishing's easier. Let's say that. Let's put it that way. You still got to work for them. You still got to find them. You still got to put the right presentation in front of them for them to eat. But I do find that maybe those systems just don't get as much pressure as well as some of these Melbourne metro areas. Throughout the night, I'll rattle off a couple of the systems, and a lot of the guys that follow me kind of know where I fish anyway around, the Patterson Lake system, the Yarra, the Maribyrnong rivers, the Werribee rivers. They're kind of the four big systems that are really close to us here in Metro Melbourne, and they really do slow down this time of year. The water temperature really drops right down. Like, we're down to about 9 degrees. Early mornings are probably 7s if we've had a couple of cold nights. So the Brim really do sit in very specific areas this time of year, and we'll talk about some of that. And we'll show the guys some of the screenshots that we've got prepared, and we've had some great questions coming in, like you said, one from Benny Gibbs as well, that I've just put together a little sort of prepared answer for that one, just talking through the technique and how long I'd spend on a particular school or a patch of fish, and how I methodically go through different lure selections and different techniques before I move on to the next one. But they're definitely still catchable this time of year, but I find that the size probably increases, but the quantity decreases for us.
Okay. Yep. So it's a trophy fish time of year. So you've already partly answered Scott Slater's question, which was, I think it was Scott said, can you talk a bit about Paddo? So yeah, we can, Scott. No worries at all. Paul's already indicated he's going to do that. But if you've got specific questions, feel free, as we go along through the evening, feel free to post those questions. So we've got Kelvin, we've got Josh, we've got Shane, we've got Joel, we've got Alex. Nice to have you guys along. So people starting to come into the room now. So Paul, we might even start to show a few screenshots, hey, and we can talk about some of that stuff. So I'm just going to switch over to the other camera here. So bear with me a moment. Now, what I'll do is I'll actually make that full screen for a moment. I'll bring you back on in a moment, mate. But tell us what we're looking at there.
Sounds good. So this is a screenshot from Bem River from memory. And what we've got here is quite an active school. So I've chosen this particular image or this screenshot. So this is a very common split screen for me personally. So a lot of the guys that have seen some of my screens before will kind of know the layout. So in the top left-hand corner, we've got our traditional sonar image. On the right-hand side beside it, I've got my down imaging with fish reveal switched on. And then across the full width of the bottom, I've got my side imaging. So this gives me just that full picture of everything that's happening underneath the kayak and out to the side. So this allows me to scan over areas without having to drive over them, but also just gives me that full width of the bottom screen to get the most out of that detail. But this particular image here is a great representation of a school of fish that isn't too tightly clustered or isn't too tightly packed. And just from my personal experience, this is the kind of stuff that I really look for when I'm trying to find an active school of fish. To me, this is one of those schools that's starting to move around. They're either on bait fish or shrimp, but they're not so tightly packed that I know they're not spawning. This is really one of those perfect schools that I'd be confident to get a couple of fish out of if I'm looking for fish this time of year.
Right. So I know that's one of the questions that's come up a couple of times is, how do you tell when the fish are active and how do you tell when they're inactive and shut down? So spawning fish pack a little bit closer together and closer to the bottom. Is that correct? And the more active fish, they're spread out a bit more. They're up in the water column a bit more. You'll see fish that are moving vertically at times as they go up to pick something up or go down to pick something up.
Yeah, spot on. Spot
okay.
on. But so you can have a tightly packed school mid-water. So even though they look like they're kind of suspended, but a lot of times it's that tightly sort of packed factor that I think really gives me the best indication of whether they're active or inactive. I really do want some separation between those fish, those individual arches or blobs or little white rice grains if we're looking at the down imaging. That really gives me an indication that those fish are active and moving up and down through that water column as we're scanning along. Whereas if they're really tightly packed, generally speaking, for me, that's a sign that they're going through their spawning period and they're not really active, not going to chew.
Yeah. We had a question come up, Paul, that's kind of relevant to the current discussion. And Wayne's asking, with fish reveal on down scan, why still have standard sonar?
We've got slightly different, we've got different frequencies, Wayne. So if I'm able to pick up and the radius or the angle of the beam will be slightly different between my traditional sonar and down imaging. So that's the reason why. And the fish reveal just gives me that a little bit of extra technology factor, I suppose, of the sounder putting in some of those arches over the downscan images that come back. So what would traditionally see as a partial arch or a little blob or a little white rice grain, the fish reveal just gives me that little bit extra, so I can definitely define what's a bit of bait versus what's an actual fish. And that's the reason why I've got the two side by side. If I'm seeing an arch on my traditional sonar or a partial, and I'm seeing a fish reveal arch, I'm really confident that what I'm looking at is actually fish and not just bait fish or other clutter in the water.
No, so it's like that multiple lines of evidence thing. You're getting different sonar signals and different sonar returns telling you the same thing, and it's a pretty good indication that you know what you're looking at. So I think Kevin Beams has also put up a question, which I think is pretty similar. So why do you run standard sonar and down scan with fish reveal at the same time? So I think we've answered that. But Kevin, if we haven't, by all means, put the question up again or ask it in a different way, and we'll come back to it. So
yeah, or if I don't answer it properly, just reach out to me afterwards, Kev or Wayne or anyone like that.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I've got another question. I'll just put another one up before we go on to the next screenshot, mate. So seeing Brim on side scan or how to set up better on side scan?
Biggest thing, so there's not really a great deal that we're doing in terms of side scan other than, so there's some key things. There's transducer placement. Transducer placement's a really critical one. So if we're in the boat, it's ensuring that we've got some really clean water passing over and underneath that transducer, making sure that when we're looking underneath the bottom of the boat, we're getting at least a couple of centimeters of the bottom side of that transducer under the lowest part of the boat, I guess. So when you're looking at the transom, you really want that transducer just ticking along underneath. and looking ahead, you really don't want any of the strakes or anything in the way of that transducer that might cause a few bubbles as the water passes underneath the boat and over that transducer. That's going to have a bit of an impact on the image quality. Then from a settings perspective, you're really talking about only a handful of things that on the side imaging side that we need to play with. So you've got your frequency, so 455 or 800 kilohertz on the Lowrance units. Traditionally speaking, 455 gives you that greater range and coverage, and 800 gives you a slightly better image quality. Personally speaking, for the majority of stuff that I do, I just keep my units in 455. I found that, from what I see, from what I find and where I fish, that works really well for me. Generally, I have my range set to about 20 to 25 either side, and for a lot of the systems, such as the Paddle, that's enough to cover it edge to edge. Even smaller systems, down South Gippsland, I only need to go 10 to 15 aside some days when the tide's really shallow. When I'm up at Malakuta, I'll really push out and maximise and limit as far as I can go in terms of getting coverage on the side imaging. But the further we go out, that the quality of the image will start to drop off. So I think to get your best image quality, if the area that you're fishing is wide enough to handle 25 to 30 aside, I think that's about as far as I would go. I'd stick the unit on 455 kilohertz. And then from a color palette perspective, it's really down to the individual, whatever you're comfortable with. I'm a huge fan of color palette number 6. I think that one works really well for me. It's a good contrast. It allows me to see structure. It allows me to see weed. Allows me to really pick up those fish. And from contrast perspective as well, it's really personal preference. I think I'm somewhere around that 82% mark. And I think, it's probably about it. I think I've covered most of the settings on side imaging.
Yeah, cool. All right, mate, let's move on and put a screenshot up, because I know our viewers love to see the screenshots. So what are we looking at here, mate?
So I've got a couple of, over the years, I've used a number of different units. So this one in particular, Greg, is a Hook 2 unit. So this is one of the units that came out a couple of years ago from the Lowrance range, and it really is that just plug and play, super simple unit. So this is one of those units where you really don't need to change many settings, but you also don't have the ability to change many. It's really just a plug it in and away you go. So a lot of the sort of smarts are done for you. So once again, just another image interpretation of an active school of fish. This was early winter a couple of years ago now, fishing in the Maribyrnong River. So I've got a couple of really good fish. We've got some good separation between them. We've got some fish just hugging the bottom, and then a couple of others. So we've got fish in 1.6, 1.7, as well as fish all the way up to 1.3. And that was just a really good example of a unit that, I didn't have to do a single thing to. It's straight out of the box. Super simple to use, but a really good image of an active school of fish that we found a couple of years ago.
Sorry, mate, I have this nasty habit of muting my microphone and forgetting to turn it back on again, so I can see you panicking there. Mate, we've got a question from Bruce Fuller, and Bruce is asking, is it best to turn your sonar off when you're using side or structure scan for less interference?
Is it best to turn when using... Hey, Bruce, no, absolutely not. Don't need to switch that off at all, because they run on totally different frequencies. So there's totally no need to switch off your normal sonar, mate.
All right. Well, that was a pretty quick and easy answer, mate. So
yeah.
we'll move on. So let me bring up the next. One.
Perfect.
Technology is wonderful. Here we go.
There we go. So this is another one from Bem. So this isn't a winter time per se, but another good example of me drifting along. So what we've got here is also another good image to show you guys what I'm looking for, or what I see when I'm just drifting. So when we're talking about getting good clarity on our side imaging, You know, the recommendation is really to get the best out of that side imaging view. You really should be moving at about 3 kilometers an hour. Anywhere from 2 to 5 will really start to give you a nice clean picture. Whereas if we have a look in that top left corner, we've got speed over ground, the SOG. So that's 0.4 of a kilometer per hour. So I was really just barely drifting along. But the key thing to look at here is we've got a school of fish underneath me on normal sonar and down imaging, as we talked about before, so I won't touch on that. But on the left-hand side of our side imaging screen down the bottom, you guys can see that we've got some black spots. So right down the middle, we've got obviously our center line where the kayak is. We've got the dark black, which is the water column beneath me. And then out to the sides, we've got some little white dots, some little white rice grains. And then to the left of those, we've got those dark black shadows. So those are actually fish that are suspended off the bottom, and they're throwing the shadows. So the easiest way for new people who are unfamiliar with side imaging technology, it's essentially just like shining a flashlight onto an object, and then it throws a shadow behind it. So if you want to think of it that way. So what we've actually got is, as we're drifting along, there's a school of fish just to the left of me in that 10 to 15 sort of meter range to the left of the kayak, as well as some a lot closer in that about 6 to 7 as well. So we can see some of those white dots that are a little bit closer to that sort of 7 meter mark off to the left side of the kayak. So it allows me to do two things as well. It allows me to, you know, using the touchscreen technology, just put my finger or a cursor onto one of those dots and hit the new waypoint key, but also just allows me to quickly grab a rod and make a little cast out to the left-hand side of the kayak and just slowly twitch and hop a little lure or a grub or a vibe and fish that school actively, because I know the fish are right there as we're drifting along.
Yeah, good stuff, mate. Now, we've got a whole swathe of questions coming through here. So I'm going to bring a couple of them up that are quite similar.
Sure.
So we've got Dale Baxter. G'day, Dale. Nice to have you here.
Mate.
So, yeah, good to see you, mate. What's the best frequency to use in the shallow systems, as in less than 5 meters deep? And before you answer that one, mate, I'll bring up Shane Ling's question as well, because they're pretty similar. So when you fish really shallow water, do you turn the sonar off so the ping doesn't spook fish? So a couple of shallow water questions there, mate. What's the best frequency? And do you turn the sonar off to avoid spooking the fish?
Perfect. So I'll start with DB. So hey, Dale. As you know, a lot of the places that we fish are generally less than 5, mate. And personally for me, I haven't switched my unit off of 455 kilohertz for quite a long time on the side imaging. So for me personally, 455 on side imaging and down. And then on our traditional sonar, I'm just running 200 kilohertz for our traditional sonar frequency. But the other thing I wanted to call out, I forgot to mention at the start, a lot of our units have a fishing mode. So within that fishing mode, just make sure that your sounder is set to shallow water. So shallow water really just allows the unit to identify and know how deep you're generally fishing. It also just allows the unit to pick up some of those changes in depth a lot easier. So, you know, as you're going in and out of really shallow water, the unit really handles it quite well. And the other two things that I wanted to call out is ensure that your ping speed is set to max and your scroll speed is set to normal. So that's going to give you a nice, really clean, good image out of your traditional sonar, out of your down imaging and your side imaging. And to Shane's question, Shane, I don't really do it unless I'm fishing in a comp and unless I'm sitting on a school. So there have been times where, especially if there's a couple of other boats around us, that will be the only times that I'll ever switch my sonar off or my unit off, or at least hit the stop sonar button. If I'm social fishing, I won't do it. If I'm in a comp and I'm sitting on a school, that's quite big, but still allows me to move around, you know, in a, let's say the size of a footy field or a swimming pool, and I know I'm just kind of going from spot to spot within the school, I'll probably switch my sounder off if I'm pretty confident I'm getting a few fish. If I still want to have that ability to mark a couple of spots, you know, look down at my map, see where I'm at, I might keep it running for a little bit longer. I really just play it by ear. If there's a couple of other boats around me and I know they're running sounders as well, you start to get a bit of interference, you start to get a fair bit more ping, and those will be the times that I'll switch my sounder off.
Good stuff, Paul. All right, so look, a couple more questions coming through. We might just continue to work our way through some of those before we move on to the next screenshot. So
Let's do it.
we've got Mark Binns. G'day, Binsy, another ALF listener. Good to have you here, mate. So is there a maximum depth where side scan becomes ineffective? So in Middle Harbour, Sydney, where Mark fishes, he gets as deep as 25 metres. I'm going to read the rest of the question because it doesn't appear on the screen. Did Brim hang out that deep? He continues on.
Hey, Mark. So personally speaking, I haven't personally fished for Brim that deep. I know, I've got quite a few friends, especially through the power of social media and Facebook. I've got quite a few friends up in Sydney who do that deep water blading thing in the harbour for Brim. I haven't heard them going any more than sort of 10 to 12 to 14 effectively. So I know that they do go down to those depths. 25s, I personally don't think so. Or it's not a depth that I would feel comfortable at. I'm more of a structure guy. I like to be up in less than 5 metres personally for the majority of my Brim fishing, as it also kind of lines up with some of the lakes and rivers and estuaries that we get down here in Victoria predominantly. In terms of side scan and its effectiveness, it absolutely is. But the key thing that you need to be mindful of there is the deeper you are, the bigger your range needs to be to accommodate for that. So if we think back to the screenshot that Greg had up previously with my quite thin black line in the middle and my that's my water column beneath me. So I'm only in 2.3, 2.4 meters there. So if you think you're in 25, that's going to pretty much, that black space is going to shift right out to the sides and pretty much take up that entire screen. So what you need to do is you need to bump out your range out to like 40 or 50 to then accommodate for that deep water in the middle, which is your water column beneath the boat or kayak either side, and then to allow it to then hit the bottom and then shoot out to the sides to start getting some of that reading off the bottom either side of the boat or kayak. So increase your range the deeper you go.
Hopefully that answers your question there, Mark. So Paul, Sarah Ramsey's posted a question, but it comes in two parts once again, so let me read it to you. So
sure.
Sarah says, I've heard you talk about the advantages of using side scan in shallow water, as you don't have to go over the fish to show them on the sounder, and you're not going to spook them. So is in this case, do you run side scan on full stream to help to see the detail better, or full screen, I should say?
No, hey Sarah, I personally don't. I think it just, and this is in no ways to be taken out of context, I guess, but it all just comes down to experience and kind of what you're looking at. So for me personally, I'll either be able to pick up a little dot or rice grain or a little line and be pretty confident that what I'm looking at is a fish. Absolutely, you can run it on full screen. The way that I've got my split screen set up is it's essentially the bottom half of my sounder is essentially full screen for, where am I? Here we are. The bottom half of my sounder is essentially full screen width anyway for side imaging. And then if I was to do the entire screen on side imaging, it would give me a little bit more detail. But I think at this point, I'm pretty confident in what I'm seeing. And there's only really a couple of things that I look for, one of which is digs. So we've got a great screenshot, maybe if we can bring that up next, Greg, is, really I'm looking for fish on that side imaging, looking for those little white dots, white rice grains, and shadows. So shadows are really quite important, especially when, as per that screenshot we had a little while back, when I'm not actively moving. If I'm just drifting and I start to see some black shapes out to the sides, I know that there's active fish that are moving in and around either to the left or right of me, so I'm casting out to those shadows regardless. And the other one is that we're going to show you guys is some digs. So a lot of time, and we'll show you what digs look like on the sounder on the side imaging. A lot of times,
let me just scroll through them, mate, and tell me which
Perfect.
slide it is that you want up there, and we can stop at that one.
Keep going, keep going, keep going. That's the one. One back.
One back?
Yep, that's it. So what we've got here on the right-hand side of the side imaging screen, so at about the 10 to 15 meter mark, is we're looking at some digs here. This is probably somewhere like Malakuta. A lot of the Gippsland systems A lot of the fish are really digging up worm and crab, and this is what I really look for. Quite often you'll find in systems like Malakuta, you'll go over these digs and there's nothing in them, but you'll come back or you'll fish the area a little bit further ahead, and you'll have some really, really nice fish still sitting in that deep water. So quite often, again, I mark these areas that I know fish have been actively feeding. They're, feeding zones, so to speak. A lot of times this feeding happens at night, but the fish are never too far away. So I always look for digs. I always look for those little white rice grains, or those shadows to indicate that there's fish either side of me. I'll mark them, appropriately on the side imaging, and then sort of refer back to them on my mapping unit. And we've got another screenshot somewhere a bit further along, I think, Greg, of kind of how I utilize that mapping screen a bit
Just
further down.
mate.
I think it might be towards the, yeah, that's it. So we'll go one back. So that top left-hand corner, guys, is a tournament weekend, but it's a really good indication, and it's similar to how I sort of approach my social fishing as well as my tournament fishing, is using a lot of the predefined sort of icons that you can use to mark different points of structure, different points of interest. So whether they're digs, whether there's fish that I've marked, fish that I've caught, the size of the fish, and then I'll also mark them on different days in different colours. So this to me indicates, on the Saturday of the tournament, fish were biting in the green zone, whereas on the Sunday I could only get them in the red zone, for example. So it's the way that I structure my waypoints, and the way that I go about methodically, I guess, finding an area and finding some sort of pattern as well within that area, to, again, really start to concentrate and spend the most time on productive areas of the lake or productive depths. So whether they're in 2.5 but no deeper than 3.2, and that's what I'll focus on for the rest of the tournament to really maximize that fishing time and key in on those fish that are biting. So you still might be able to find fish out in those deeper waters in 3, 3.5, 4, but I find that a lot of the fish really have a very specific depth or temperature range that they're happy to eat in, and then the other fish are still doing their spawn thing or not quite ready. They're in a staging pattern, or they're ready to move up, but they're not quite ready to eat. So it's something to be mindful of. Don't sit on those schools for too long. Move away and find those schools that are active, mark them in a certain way, and then focus on those as you go throughout the day.
Excellent stuff. Now, Paul, we had a couple of questions that were submitted in advance, so we might go through those if you like. So
sounds good.
Let's bring up this one from Nikki Bryant. So Nikki's asking, and Nikki incidentally has been a guest on the podcast, as has her husband, as has her son on multiple occasions. So they're a real fishing family over there in Western Australia. Not sure if Nikki will be tuning in because
Nikki's down in Victoria, actually.
She's down in Victoria, is she?
She's down in Victoria. It's a lovely fishing family. Had the pleasure of chatting to the guys a number of times, so I know them well.
Okay, I'm getting my wires crossed perhaps. That's all right. Very, very good. So Nikki's asking, can we distinguish Brim from other species on our sounder screen?
So let's bring up a couple that we had lined up. And by the way, guys, for anyone who's looking at that thinking they're Mulloway, they weren't. They were just Brim. But we're just drifting very slowly over those. That's it, Greg. Yep, one back, please. One more. Perfect. Thank you. So this is one of two screenshots out of the Patterson River. And so on the down imaging is probably the better one. The traditional sonar up the top right, the fish are got some separation between the fish. But we're not quite getting that indication of size, whereas I think the down imaging screens are really good indication of size. We've got some smaller brim, and then just towards the bottom there, we're starting to see a couple of really big arches. And then if we go to the next one again, please, Greg, going forwards or down. Yep, that's it. So towards the right-hand side of our traditional sonar, and even on down imaging, we can see that we've just got a small patch of brim. Again, we've got some separation. They're a bit more tightly packed than the previous screenshot, but then again, we've just got that really clear image of, we've got a nice big arch. It's got some real size to it. It's a nice big blob and some real solid color. And then on that down imaging, it's hard to miss. Like, we've got a real solid fish there in comparison to some of those brim. So to me, this is the kind of thing that I look for when I'm, chasing dewies in the Yarra or chasing dewies in the Patterson River. This is the kind of stuff that I look for. But at the same time, if I'm fishing for brim and I see this, generally it might even turn those brim off a little bit from chewing, as they might turn into fish food.
Very good. All right, mate. Let me just come back and talk to you for a moment. We've got a few more questions popping up, so guys, keep them coming. We're happy to keep going through them. If we don't answer them straight away, that's because there's a pile of them starting to build up. If we don't get to them, feel free to put them up again, and hopefully we'll get through all of them before the night's out. Or as Paul says, once the live stream's over, you can always put a comment up on his Facebook or on my Facebook, and we'll get back to you with an answer. So the other thing I should mention is that this live stream also goes out to YouTube, and it gets archived. This fly's annoying. It gets archived with timestamps on it, so you can actually go back through the video and just choose those bits that you want to watch. You don't have to watch the whole thing again to get the answers to the particular questions that you want. So I'll put a link to the YouTube in the description for this post a bit later on. So Paul, we've got Paddy Budd, who's saying he's got a Hook 7 TS. Does he need to make adjustments at all, or just leave it? Mainly fishes shallow water, 4 to 7 metres, and offshore sometimes 25 to 35 metres.
Hey, Paddy. Look, on the triple shot, there's really not a lot that you need to do, mate. Now, I haven't played around with a triple shot for a number of years now, so the only thing I want to do is just double check for you. Maybe we can come back to that one.
Yeah. Perhaps we could get back to Paddy with a personal message. If anyone else has got a question, we can do that. Just let us know and we can give you the same answer. But rather than try and Google things as we're going. But yeah.
Yeah. No. So the only thing there, Paddy, is in the 4 to 7, mate. Absolutely leave it as it is out of the box. There's absolutely nothing that you need to do in terms of any setting changes. I think they're an absolutely great unit for that less than 10 metre depth. And then maybe I'll reach out to you about the 25 to 35 sort of range, and we can see what we can do there. But generally speaking, they are just a plug and play unit. That's kind of the big kicker with them is there's not a lot that needs to be done in terms of settings. The unit does the majority of the work for you.
Excellent stuff. All right. Now, Paul Langley's asking, and again, this one won't come up fully on the screen, but there's a whisper that there's something big coming from Lowrance to improve their live site in the coming months. Do you think this will improve the impact on the Brim scene?
Hey, Paul. Look, it's something that the guys are obviously working on. I haven't heard anything around in the coming months. I think we're still a little while away, but we haven't got great visibility of that, to be 100% truthful. It's something that I'm quite excited about personally, but having seen some of the competition and some of the other brands and the way that some of their live site functionality kind of works, I definitely think I'll see it as an advantage around structure. In some of those open systems like Malakuta, where I fish, or Gippsland Lakes, even Nelson. So we've got some great river systems with some fantastic structure. But personally speaking, I think that live site sort of functionality is really more geared towards really big pieces of structure. So we're looking at trees, places like up north where the guys are chasing barramundi or sooty grunter, and you're really going from, or bass. Bass, I mean, is a perfect example as well as yellow belly at Windermere and places like that. I think those are probably the better applications for that live site functionality. I think for Brim, I'm still able to pedal along in my kayak, idle along in the boat, and still use my side imaging to pick up fish under pontoons. I don't need a live site unit to sort of point it at the pontoon and see if there's anything there, see how they're moving around. It's great, but I don't think it's going to be critical, and I don't think it's going to change tournament fishing, especially for Brim, in a lot of the places that we fish personally. I think side imaging and traditional sonar's really got that covered. That's my sort of personal opinion on it. But as soon as it's out, don't worry, I'll be getting it anyway. So.
There you go, mate. So that answers your question. So Shane Mabry's asking, I have a hook too, and when I move into 1 metre of water, the screen freezes until I get back into deeper water. I usually run down scan and side scan. Does this happen to your unit?
Hey Shane, no, it wasn't anything that I ever experienced with my Hook 2. So just a quick call out, I've been running the Elite TI2 for probably the last 12 to 18 months now, and I ran the Hook 2 for about 12 months back in 2018 to the start of 2019. But never had an issue, Shane. I would reach out to the Navico team. I think it's 1300 Navico. You get through to the guys over in Sydney or in New Zealand, and they'll take care of you and let you know what you need to do with it if it's having any software issues, mate. But yeah, they'll get you squared away.
All right. So Shane Ling, what speed do you travel when you get those digs showing on your sounder, mate?
Hey Lingy, just again in that 2 to 5 kilometers an hour range. I think 3 to 4 is probably ideal speed for side imaging, but it all comes down to your hull. So from memory, you've got the bass boat, mate. I'm tipping it's transom mounted or mounted to the bottom of the hull. I really do think that 3 to 5 kilometers an hour is probably the ideal speed for side imaging to get the digs to show.
All right, mate. Now, this next question I think might relate to some of the slides that we've got coming up. So I'll bring it up and we can switch over to the slide deck again.
Perfect. Hey, Wayno, does the Burley Pro Guard interfere with the signal at all? Not at all, buddy. So all these images that you guys are seeing are all taken with a Burley Pro transducer shield over my transducer.
Sorry, let me just go back, and perhaps for those who aren't familiar with the Burley Pro Guard, mate, you might like to give us a bit of a rundown on it.
Yeah, that's right. So the Burley Pro Guard or Burley Pro transducer shield is a really hard perspex cover that goes over the top of your transducer, and that is attached to the bottom of the Hobie kayak. So a lot of the newer Hobies have a guardian system, which essentially retracts the transducer and protects it in a way as well. But this just allows you to have this transducer shield over the top of the transducer at all times. So you know that your transducer has been protected, but the thickness of that transducer shield still allows the signal to pass through without any issues whatsoever. Marty's done some great things to the design. You can see some little holes there. So if you're beach launching or you're getting into the shallows, you can get a bit of sand built up. But as you travel along, that water pushes through that transducer shield and just washes all that sand back out, so you never have any issues. Still open it up from time to time, every 6 to 12 months, and see if there's any debris in there. Give it a little clean out if you need to, but generally speaking, you don't need to. It's a great little investment in protecting your transducer, but also getting those fantastic readings at all times without having to hang like a bracket off the back of the kayak, having to flip it up manually. It's just there at all times, but you know it's protected. So it's a great little aftermarket accessory.
All right, moving on to the next question. So Steve Peach, thanks for your question, mate. So Paul, do you have any success picking out Brim on bank side structure using side scan?
Hey Steve, I do, mate. Look, the big one here is the type of bankside structure that I look for. Again, I'll use examples such as Malakuta, Gippsland Lakes, Nelson, or Warrnambool. So those 4 systems that I talk about, they're generally speaking quite heavily lined with quite big boulders and rocks on the sides. And again, so what I'm looking for there is in amongst those rocks, I'm looking for those little white rice grains, those little white dots. And that's the type of thing that I look for. So generally speaking, Dad and I, if we're in a tournament event, we will side scan a rocky structure. We'll go along for 100, 150 meters. Generally speaking, if those rocks or that section of bank is holding fish, you'll start to see a bit of a pattern. We might not mark individual fish, but we know that particular stretch of rocks is holding fish. And all it takes is 2, 3, 4 little dots for me to be confident that rocky structure is holding fish. The other key thing with it is it really depends on how those fish are positioning on the rocks or at the bottom of those rocks, and that will really determine what the signal looks like or the image interpretation back on the screen. A lot of times the fish will sit between rocks. So if there's a crevice, say so wide between 2 boulders, and that brim's sitting right in the middle of the 2 waiting for something to come through and ambush it, well, that signal is not going to be able to pick up that fish because there's a boulder in the way. So you do have to make some, I guess, adjustments mentally, that looking at the side imaging screen, I can see what the structure of the bottom looks like. I can see it's quite reefy. There's lots of rocks. I can see a couple of fish, and I'm going to assume that there's a couple more that I've missed because of the way that the rocks are so kind of positioned underwater. And there's probably some extra fish there that I can't see because they're just sitting out of the way behind those rocks.
Thanks for that, Paul. So I'm going to bring up a question that was submitted earlier in the week, and it was from Ben Gibbs. So, Paul, what's the best way to convince shutdown schools of bream to bite? What are the best techniques, lures, size and type? Or, if they're shut down, do you just give up and move on, mate?
Yeah. Hey, Gibbsy. So awesome question, mate. Thank you for submitting that in. I'm going to refer to a little one-pager that I put together for this one in particular. And I'll talk to you guys, I guess, as Greg said earlier, this video is about sonar, but also about trying to maximise our ability to catch bream in winter, especially down here in Victoria or South Australia. Our climates are very similar, our systems are very similar. So for me personally, winter time for bream, there's only a small handful of lures that I will use. So the three key lure types will be small soft plastics, small stick minnows, and small vibes. From there, within the soft plastic range, I'm in the 2 to 2.75 inch size, so quite small. And from a colour perspective, I keep it very simple this time of year. Motor oil, pumpkin seed, and olive. Really those greens, browns, and our UV colours. Blacks as well, but I'm personally not a huge fan of blacks, so I stick to the other three. For me personally, this time of year, our waters are a little bit more discoloured. So those three lure colours that I spoke about really have a great silhouette this time of year. They really stand out underwater. We also, during the week, we've been talking about painting jig heads. So getting some of that powder paint, the temp powder paint, painting some of the jig heads using some of the UV powders. Orange is a fantastic colour in really dirty water. We've also got, obviously, all the motor oils. So this just gives a little bit of extra shine, a little bit of extra glow to your lure, whether it's a soft plastic, or even, you're able to make some other modifications to other types of lures. You're able to dunk a little bit of the bladed lures into some of that powder paint and set it as well, just for a bit of extra glow. So from a technique perspective, it's really, I start out with my soft plastics. I start out with that 2.5 inch grub or 2.75 inch swim. If I'm not having any luck, I'll go down to a 2-inch grub just to see if I can finesse them. The next thing that I'll switch on over to will be a stick minnow. I only fish stick minnows when the water's relatively clear. I think the subtle action of a stick minnow in wintertime can be fantastic for those fish that are slightly suspended, not the ones that we're talking mid-water that aren't doing anything. Those fish that are still relatively active, but the water's clear, they can see that little flutter on the way down. When it's super dirty, I personally don't bother with the stick minnow. I stick to my plastics and I stick to vibe lures. So moving into vibes, 35mm size I think is probably the perfect size come winter time, especially for us Victorians. Something like the EcoGear VX35 or EcoGear ZX35. So the key difference there is we've got the VX with the 2 sets of trebles and the ZX35 with the stinger hooks. So the stinger hooks are obviously fantastic for those fish that are just picking at it. They're trying to just grab the feelers off that little ZX, which looks like a little prawn. It's also got that real nice wide wobble. So I generally just rotate between the two of those. And on the vibe side of things, I really like the blacks and the greys. So like that colour 339 in the EcoGear range, or 443 from memory. It's just the black. And in terms of like time spent on a particular school, Benny, I generally give it, if it's a school that's quite sizable and I can move within it, I give it 20 to 30 minutes. I'll give 10 minutes on the plastics, maybe 5 on the stick minnow if it's clear, and then another 10 to 15 on the vibe, and then maybe come back and do the 2-inch grub again for a couple of casts just to see if I can get those fish to eat. The other thing that I haven't talked about, but I think is quite important, in winter time, we've got really varying sizes of schools. So we've got schools that are quite compact, that are only the size of this room, for example. and then we've got schools that can stretch for the size of a footy field. The key thing with those schools is picking the edges of those schools. A lot of times those fish that are smack bang in the middle of those schools are really quite inactive. A lot of the fish that have finished their spawn or are actually quite interested in what's happening, they're the more feeding active fish, they're hanging around the outside. So it's quite important to identify where the school starts, where the school ends, especially if that coincides with a structure change. So if I've got a turn in the river, if I've got a rocky point, if I've got a jetty that kind of coincides with the end of a school, that's where I'm going to focus my time. I'm going to focus on those outer edges of the school, as I think that's where the bigger fish and the more active fish will be. But generally, if I'm not getting any hits whatsoever after 20 to 30 minutes, I'm out of there. I'm finding that next piece.
Yeah, mate, I've just put up a question as well from Warwick Holmes, which was very, very similar. But he finishes with, and you probably answered this as well, but he finishes with a slightly different question. That is, how far would you normally move off? If you're on an active school, you can't tempt them, you decide you're going to move on. How far would you normally move off to find a new school?
Hey, Warwick, it's a bit of a tricky question to answer, but look, let's use Malakuta as an example. So if we're in the bottom lake and I've got fish that I've marked in 2.5 meters and I'm just not getting them to eat at all, I will generally fish within, say, 2 to 3 kilometers of that area, because it's such a vast system. And I mean, with bass boat technology or most tinnies, you're able to move around quite freely. As per the previous question with Benny, I'll give it 20 to 30 on a particular spot, especially in a tournament where you've got 2 anglers on a boat. You can really vary your techniques, your lure selection, your retrieves. If you're not getting hits between the 2 of you, I would move. I wouldn't move 500 meters. I'd move a bit further. I still think that a lot of times you need to get away from that school. You need to get into a new zone. I will go, 0.2, 0.3 of a meter shallower, 0.2, 0.3 of a meter deeper. I'll go to a point. I'll go to a rock wall. I'll try something different until I find that pattern. If I know that out on that mud, I'm not getting those fish to fire up, I'll move to a part that's got a bit of wind blowing onto the bank or in that particular area. Even though, you're in one river system or one lake system, the top lake at Malakuta could be blowing 15 knots and the bottom lake still hasn't got any wind on it, or vice versa. So it's thinking about the forecast, thinking about the types of structure that's in the area within 5 to 10 minutes of me. So it's maximizing your fishing time. So you don't want to travel for half an hour if you can avoid it. But I generally try and get away from that school. I'm not going to move 100 meters. I'm not going to move 200 meters. I'm going to try and find something completely different. But learn from what I did. Take that on board. Go, well, those fish out on the mud, they were sitting there in 2.5. They were pretty close to the bottom, or they were mid-water. That's not what I'm going to look for right now. I'm going to find something that's quite different to that and see if this next patch of fish will eat. And then if they do, that's what I want to try and replicate as I move around from spot to spot and keep going throughout the day.
Good stuff. Mate, that was a masterclass. So I've been jotting down notes here, and I'm going to go back. Of course, we've got the recording, so we can go back to YouTube or back to Facebook and watch it again. So thank you for that. So going back now to Sounders, Paul. So Nick is asking for some recommendations in terms of batteries for running units. I guess he's talking about on kayaks. You're predominantly a kayak fisherman.
Yeah, I am. I mean, Nick, in the kayak, mate, I'm running the FPV 17.5 amp hour lithiums. I'll have to get back to you on what we're running out of the boat, as it's not one that I remember off the top of my head. I think we're roughly in that 100 amp hour range on the boat for the HDS 12 Live. But for the Elite TI2 on my Hobie, I'm running the 17.5 hour lithium from FPV Power, and that's been a really good battery to me so far. When I do upgrade the kayak, I am toying with the idea of going to a 12-inch unit with the 3D transducer and module, so I may need to go up and bump that up to about a 30 amp hour, 36 sort of amp hour-ish to get a full day to 2 days out of the larger screen and the 3D module as well. So that's something that I'm toying with on the 360 Hobie.
Awesome. So Wayne's asking, or has made a comment, I guess, that he's just fitted his TI2 with 3-in-1, had to fit the guard to the transducer on the PA17. Now, that to me sounds like French. I'm hoping it means something to you, Paul.
I had to fit the guard to fit the transducer. I'm not entirely sure what Wayno's asking in that last section. Apologies, Wayne. So you've got the PA17, you've got the 3-in-1 active imaging transducer on the bottom. I'm not sure what fitting the guard, what you're referring to there. If you're talking about that Belly Pro transducer shield, or whether you're talking about having to modify something, not too sure. So maybe just
Wayne,
reach out to us.
fire us another question, mate. See if you can clarify, or otherwise we can get in touch with you afterwards. And
Yeah.
I'm sure Paul will be able to help you out. So a fairly lengthy one here from Steve Morris. So I'll read the full thing out to you. But
I can answer it already. I already know this one.
yeah, you know the guest and you know the question.
Oh, I know.
Right?
Yeah, I know, Steve.
Look, for the benefit of those that don't know the question, it's really about how to effectively manage waypoints, and the fact that you can put a lot of waypoints into a unit over the course of a comp, and do you leave them there for the next comp, or do you delete them, or how do you tell old ones from new ones quickly, and that kind of stuff. So give us a few of your pro tips there, Paul, for managing those waypoints before they get out of hand.
So I know a few of you will probably scoff at this, but while I'm still relatively young, my memory is still pretty good. So I generally either wipe them completely, or given life changes, you have a little one come along, you don't get the opportunity to fish as often. A lot of times I'm back to the same system 12, 18 months later. A lot of times I've either had a new unit put on the kayak or the boat, trying something different out, or I've reset it. So a lot of times I'm just starting completely from scratch again. I think that's probably the best way. What it allows me to do is it doesn't give me any preconceived ideas. Allows me to think to that particular weekend, to the weather, to the time of year. It allows me to look at the water clarity, look at the water temperatures, and formulate a plan, and to start from scratch. At the end of a weekend, there's absolutely no issues putting in 200-300 waypoints over the course of 3 days, and then really it's just putting that in the memory bank. I really should keep a diary, but I don't. But personally speaking, everything tends to just go in the memory bank. For now, it's pretty good. We've got some great opportunities to take photos, have some memories, obviously on the phone, through Facebook, through a couple of other ways, through the vlogs that I'm now doing as well. So I get to document those things. But for me, as I said, I categorize my waypoints over the course of a weekend just by color coding through either size, colors, days of the comp. And then from there, I'll just forget about it. It's really come to the next event at the same location, and with a fresh mindset, start from scratch. Oh, I think we got you on mute.
I'm glad your memory is good, Paul. I don't think my memory was that good even when I was younger, so I'm impressed that you can manage all of that. So, Paul, question from Benjamin Hodgkins. So, does running the downscan overlay on traditional sonar add any benefits?
Hey, Benny. No, mate. For me personally, I never run the downscan overlay over traditional sonar. For me, the image just gets a little bit too complicated. I'm trying to see too much there. I think with even a 7-inch unit, you've got enough screen real estate to run split screens of your traditional sonar and down imaging side by side, as well as the side imaging along the bottom. I think from a screen real estate and usage of that space, that's probably the best way to split your screen. And I personally don't see any benefit to overlaying the downscan over traditional sonar.
Alrighty. So one here from Lee Waddington. So he's got a Hook 2.7 triple shot in his kayak. Are there any particular setting preferences that you have when facing different water conditions? So, for example, differences in water clarity, concentration of debris. How do you filter these externals out to better identify the fish?
Hey, Lee. So predominantly, even on my, as we talked about the Hook 2, the Hook 2 is really that really simple unit. The unit does everything for the angler, essentially. It's a plug and play unit. But even looking at my, I've used the HDS units. I've used the Carbons, the Lives, the Elite TI2s. I generally run my units on auto for most parts these days. The key thing that I do have them on is auto +4 or +5 on my sensitivity. What I find with auto sensitivity, I think the units really handle the changes in water clarity, water temperatures really well. I think perhaps 5-10 years ago, some of those auto settings really backed off some of that sensitivity, gave you a nice clean screen, but what you were missing as an angler was a lot of those arches, a lot of those partial arches, a lot of those blobs that are fish that the unit was not really picking up and thinking that it was clutter on the screen. But these days, I think the auto sensitivity on the units is absolutely fantastic. As I said, I bumped mine up by a couple of percent, and the reason for that is I prefer to put up with a bit of additional clutter on the screen, but it allows me to pick up those additional partial arches that a lot of people miss out on. So it's those little 1%ers, as we say, that will allow you to find those fish that a lot of other people will miss out on. From some of the other settings perspective, I guess, especially with the Hook 2, there's really not much more there. From memory, you can play around with the contrast, which is really just how light or how dark the image is on the side imaging and down imaging. And for me personally, I think mine was sitting somewhere around that 76 to 82% mark, and that's just what I'm comfortable with in terms of the returns that I get. I don't want to wash anything out, so I don't want to go above 82%, and I don't want it to be too dark. So I'm kind of sitting there somewhere. But as I said, even going from a clear system such as Malakuta coming back to Melbourne, I think that auto plus a couple of percent works really well for me. I think we've got you on mute again, Greg.
Yeah, only this time it wasn't my fault. This time I was actually pressing the button and it wouldn't turn off. Sorry about that, guys. I've actually got a bit of a throat bug, so I keep turning it off because I'm coughing and gasping. So I don't want you to have to listen to that. But anyway, so Paul, Carl states asking us, is the scale on the side image a true representation of how far the fish are from you? Great question, Carl. Love it.
Absolutely. Hey, Carl, from my experience, from what I found, it's been a really, really accurate representation of how far they are. There was one particular example at Malakuta in 2018, so around this time 2 years ago. So Dad and I hadn't fished an event for quite a while together. We're having a good day, bottom lake of Malakuta. We had our 5. We were just side scanning a bank. That's a bank that we rarely fish as well. Found a patch of 3 to 4 active fish on side imaging. They were 20 meters to the right-hand side. I literally didn't even have the electric motor down yet. Pinged out a cast 20 meters to the side, or 25 meters, 30 meters. So trying to cast past that school. I was in about 4.5 to 5 meters, 2-inch grub on a 1/6 jig head. It sunk down to the bottom, 2 twitches, clunk. So I was right there. That image really was true, and the scale really showed me how far that fish was away from where we were. I think it ended up taking big Brim and obviously helped us secure a really good bag and a win. But literally, side scanning, going, oh, there's fish, getting up, bang, quick cast, and 5 seconds later we're hooked up. So it was incredible. But from what I found, super accurate, mate.
Excellent stuff. Now, Warren's asking, he's saying he's really late. Is there anywhere you can get this podcast from the start? Yeah, there is, mate. Don't worry. It will be available. So what happens at the end of the live stream is Facebook will tell you there's a problem. There's actually not a problem. It's just Facebook processing a whole hour of live stream, and then it'll come back and put the replay on whichever Facebook page you happen to be watching this from. Or you can go over to fishingqna.com/sonar, and you'll find a replay there with some timestamps. Or you can go to YouTube, so doclewis.com. YouTube, and you'll find that there's a replay there with timestamps as well. So you haven't missed anything. And I notice that you've also asked a question, so I'll bring that question up now. So you've made the most of the opportunity, Wayne. So Warren, sorry. So good stuff. So Paul, what's the heaviest braid and leader combo that you would use for winter brim fishing?
Hey Warren, so generally speaking, I won't go any lighter than 4-pound leaders. From what I found, unless the water's like crystal clear up north around Foster or some of those other systems. In Victoria, there's really no need at this time of year to run your 2.5s, your 3s. If you're not getting fish on 4, for the most part, I'd move on. Generally speaking, if the water's quite dirty and I'm fishing around structure, I will run 6 pound leaders, 6 pound uni Tika. I found that that's the best fluorocarbon leader in terms of its diameter compared to its breaking strain. So I found that a lot of other 6 pound leaders are quite thick in comparison to the uni Tika. So I think that's a great leader choice. And in terms of braid, I'm not running anything lighter than 10 pound braid on all my Brim outfits, even the lightest Brim outfits in the Grub Freaks, and 2004 size reels. So I've got quite finesse, exist reels, but I'm running 10 pound all the way up to 16 pound. And the reason for that is the diameter on braid and the technology with braid is just so amazing these days. Everything's so thin. We've got these 8-strand, 12-strand braids that are just super supple, super round. You can just cast them an absolute mile, but it also just allows me to then pick up one of those rods, pick up one of my heavier Brim rods and go snapper fishing with it or go mulloway fishing. So it still allows me to do my whole Brim thing, still allows me to tie great knots, but then has the flexibility to go and chase other stuff. So that's kind of my setups.
Very good. So Luke Turner's asking, he's got an Elite 9 Ti2, and he's asking, can we talk about installing updates on the unit? So SD size, card size needed, and the process of updating. And there's a couple of comments have come up. I won't bring them up on the screen, but a couple of people, Nikki's one, have said 32 gigabytes is the size to get for SD cards.
Yep.
In terms of the update process, we probably don't want to get too technical here, mate, but can you direct Luke to the appropriate place to find that information?
Yeah, so I'll quickly touch on it. As Nikki and some of the other guys said, please don't get an micro SD card bigger than 32 gig. If you can get your hands on a 16 or a 32, those two will be perfect. There's 2 ways that you can update your Elite Ti2, Luke. You can connect it to Wi-Fi or hotspot off your mobile phone. So you can connect your mobile phone through the Wi-Fi through the unit, and then it'll pick up if there's any updates through the system. So you don't even need a memory card for that at the time. So you can do that directly. You can connect it to your home Wi-Fi if your garage or shed or kayak's just near the house. The second option is through the computer, is jumping onto the Lowrance website or onto Google, searching for Lowrance software updates, and then finding your particular unit and finding the latest software update through the Lowrance software update section, and then just following the steps. Everything's really broken down quite simply and takes you through the process step by step of what you need to do. So that will be my recommendation for updating your software, mate.
All right, on to another more general Brim fishing question. So Dale, once again, so I'm guessing this is a bit of an in-joke, but what's the benefit of using a double uni
Well
knot,
played,
mate?
DB. Well played. The benefit of a double uni knot over an FG knot, as everyone would know, is it catches more Brim and it catches bigger Brim. And it allows me to tie it with my eyes closed in about 15 seconds flat. So that's a bit of a stitch up. Well played, Dale.
All right, Stenko's asking what length of rods you use, Paul.
Hey, Zdenko. Look, for wintertime brimming, like I said at the start, answering Benny's question, especially around some of the lures and the techniques that I use with soft plastics and some of those small vibes, I predominantly use a longer rod. So I use 7'3" Miller rods, Grub Freaks. So they really got a nice sensitive tip, really super light, but amazing sensitivity. It allows me to make nice long casts. And then I go down to about a 7-footer for the most part on my Miller rods, Twitch Freaks. So again, using those for vibes, using those for stick minnows, they're just a little bit heavier than the Grub Freak. Just allows me to get those fish out of structure if I need to, but at the same time, I think the 7-footer is probably like that perfect all-rounder, whether you're in the kayak or the boat. Allows you to make nice skip casts underhanded around structure, but also allows you to get those lures out a long way. So I think 7 foot to 7'3" is probably my ideal sort of spot at the moment. And then I've got some shorter rods, especially fishing around structure, 6-footers, 6'7", when I need to turn those fish's heads and get them out on heavier line.
Very good, mate. We've got one final question. So, guys, we're going to start wrapping up. We do have one last question. I'll bring it up now, if I can find it again. We've got two now. Dwayne's put one up as well. So, before that, Harry's asking, Paul, why are you such a champion? I think we all know the answer to that. Anyone who's sat here through the last hour or so and picked up a ton of great tips that Paul's given away freely knows exactly why he's such a champion. So,
thanks, Harry. You need to take Pella out to catch a few fish with you, mate. You need to teach him a thing or two. But I hope Chris is watching as well.
So the last couple of questions, guys. We've got a couple more that have just cropped up. If you've got another question, fire it through. We'll go another few minutes and then we'll start to wrap it up. So Dwayne's asking, can you identify freshwater on top of saltwater using your sounder?
Hey, Dwayne, great question, mate. You absolutely can. We're kind of looking for, I call them thermoclines. Greg, is it possible we could bring up some of those screenshots, please? I think I've got
absolutely.
A perfect image. You're really looking for, even what we're looking at there, Craig. So, Dwayne, that on the left-hand side on our traditional sonar, in about 1 metre, you've got that really sort of thick red line. To me, that's the separation between the fresh and salt water. So I've got the fresh water sitting there on top, and for me, I've got the clean salt water underneath. I've got that salt wedge between sort of 2.3 and 1.2, and then I've got some fresh water sitting on top. So I use that sort of dark line. Sometimes it's a bit of a thinner line on the down imaging, but it's really quite clear, often quite clear, and really easily distinguishable on the sounder to identify that fresh water on top of the salt.
Well done. Absolute last question, guys. So Justin Costa is just after a few tips, mate, for the best lures to use in the Werribee River. There's probably about a gazillion of them, but let's just focus on over the next couple of months, over the winter months.
For me, Justin, it still has to be the grub and the ZX vibe. So I'll be looking with the Werribee River, if you're in the kayak or the boat and you're fishing the boat hulls in the bottom third of the river system, so closer to the boat ramp, things such as creature baits. So you've got, your Damiki, monster Mikis, your gulp crabbies. And then as you head up the system, you've got obviously the natural structure, the natural bends of the river. You've got some channel buoys, I guess, a bit up from those boat holes. So fishing those deep drop-offs with grubs and ZX vibes, I find that those two are probably the two standouts for me, both on brim and estuary perch this time of year.
Good stuff. Now, mate, we have had a couple of last-minute questions. Do you want to keep going, or you had enough?
I'm happy to keep going if you are.
I thought you might be talking fishing, so why would you want to stop? So Gaz is asking, mate, how many times have you had donut trips in the paddo? Mate, we all have them. Let's just see how many you've had.
Yeah, I would have had them, Gaz. I haven't had one for a while, so as some of you guys might have seen, on my birthday, it probably took me about 8 hours to catch a single brim. I ended up doing it in a section really close to the floodgates. For those of you guys that know the paddo, that first section between the first floodgate and the bridge. So we've got a series of pontoons. And I'd fished the area earlier in the day, so it was a run-out tide. Had one hit early in the day, spent the next 6 hours up and down the system, didn't have a touch. And then as I was leaving the system, on my way back out, that tide had turned, and it was really pumping through that single floodgate at the moment as they're doing construction work in there. And I think it was the second or third pontoon from the floodgate where there was some really heavy current. But I found those fish on the side imaging and down imaging as I was fishing my way around there. So I knew there was fish sitting under those pontoons. Little grub under the pontoon, hopped it and finally got one. But that was probably as close as I've gotten to a donut out of the paddo for the last couple of years. Like it's really tough in there at the moment. And the system's changed so much over the last few years. Like 2 years ago, this time of the year, it wasn't uncommon to catch 20 or 30 brim in a session, and some really, really nice fish. So I think the paddo's just fishing a little bit tough at the moment. I think some of the current changes with that floodgate repair that they've got going on at the moment is probably making a bit of an impact. Might also have a bit of extra pressure that we haven't had for a little while. I think there's probably a few more anglers in there than there used to be. But the other thing is it just seasonal. It's, it swings and roundabouts, so to speak. It will come good in the next couple of months, or next year we'll be fishing as it was a couple of years ago. So it's really just about giving it a couple of weeks rest, coming back. And I also find that picking the right tides and the right time, coinciding with the right time of day. So something like a rising tide or a high tide early in the morning around 8, 9 o'clock, it allows you to get on the water at a decent time at, say, 7, just as the sun's come up, or just as the sun's coming up, you're out on the water and it's got that rising tide. So you've always got flow in the system, and you've got at least, you're coming up to a time or a period where the water's quite high, and generally those fish have either moved up onto the edges, which have been previously exposed for the last 6 or 8 hours. Now they're moving up on the flats, onto those rock walls, or they're sitting up under those pontoons. And then as that tide changes and starts to push back out, at least you've got some water movement in the system that hopefully gets those fish to trigger and bite a bit better. And then you've got some food moving through the system with the current as well. So that's what I look for in terms of timing of my trips. So try and coincide a morning session with a early morning sort of high tide around that 8, 9 o'clock mark, and then you can be off the water by midday and have a great day.
There you go. That's how to avoid the donuts. A question from Nick, mate. Do you have a preferred colour palette you use on traditional sonar in dirty water?
Hey, Nico. For me, it's colour palette number 13, so clear water or dirty water. I'm a huge fan of number 13, and the main reason for that is colour palette 13 is a great differentiator for weed. So weed really comes through as a nice bright green for me. You've got that nice brown colour along the bottom for the bottom. But the big standout for me is the way that it interprets and displays weed. So weed patches, trees, shrubs, things like that. They really come through nice and clear as green. And it's also a really good benefit for those guys, that fish for things other than just brim. So for the guys that are fishing for whiting out in the bay, the calamari, it's a fantastic colour palette. And obviously for the guys who fish for bass, whether it's in Australia, overseas, a lot of that vegetation is really important for them. So I think colour palette 13 is a fantastic traditional sonar palette.
There we go. All right. Look, there's 2 more questions, guys, and I absolutely am gonna wrap it up after that. We have Nat is asking, do you ever use fish reveal function on downscan?
I used to, as you guys saw in some of the screenshots. I've actually taken it off in more recent times. And it's just a personal preference. There's absolutely no right or wrong answer to that. I actually just prefer seeing some of those little blobs. I'm quite confident in what I'm seeing. So when I see those little white rice grains, I'm also able to see some of those bigger blobs when I'm looking at fish such as snapper or mulloway. And then looking at my traditional sonar, I'm looking for those arches or partial arches and seeing the blobs on downscan. I'm really happy with that. So more recently, I've taken fish reveal off.
There we go. And the very last question, Paul. I see there's a couple more actually starting to spring up, but we are going to stop. At some stage, we have to stop. So this is a more general fishing question again. Yep. So when fishing Malakuta, do you prefer the top lake or the bottom lake for brim?
Hey guys, if I was just a general answer, I would say the top lake for me. But I've definitely caught winning bags out of both systems. It's really time of year, and both top lake and bottom lake could be holding fish, could be holding active fish. It's about trying to identify which part of the lake and which part of the system has got those slightly bigger fish. So these days with technology, with patterns, with lures, a lot of anglers are catching their 5 bag limits, especially in tournament situations. But it's how do you push yourself up the rankings, and how do you get those slightly bigger fish? So it's not about spending time on a school that's kicking out 500-gram fish all day long. Like, it's super fun. People come back, oh, I caught 50 fish, but they're all the same. You need to move on, especially after you got your 5. There's no point sitting on that school of 500 grammers when you know guys are going to catch 1s, 1.3s, 1.5s out of that place. There's no, we fish competitively in the tournaments, obviously, to try and do well. So yes, having a fun weekend's really important, but it's really important to try and identify the areas that are holding those bigger fish. So again, different times of year, they will move up and down that system. Don't be afraid to target yellowfin all the way up to Gypsy Point. So we're talking about top lake and beyond. So those yellowfin just aren't sitting in the bottom lake anymore. They're well spread through the system. Different times of the year, they will hold a lot more weight. And then at other times, we've got 48, 49 centimetre fish, yellowfin, that are only weighing 1.3 because they've spawned out and they're just skinny dinner plates. And that's the time of year you really want to target blacks. So it's then identifying, are the blacks sitting on structure? Are they in the tea tree? Are they on those rock walls? Are they up around Gypsy Point? Or are they out on the mud? There's really, quite a number of different places they could be sitting at Malakuta. And it's really about breaking up your day in trying to hit some of those places and then quickly establish a pattern and then keep hitting that pattern all around the system. So that's a really long-winded answer for your question, but top lake, but then move around.
It may have been a long-winded answer, Paul, but I was watching the stats and I don't see anyone disappearing. People are still listening to what you have to say. And look, I want to thank you, mate. We promised everybody that tonight would be a masterclass in brim fishing, and you have absolutely delivered on that promise. I want to thank you. I also want to thank Navico and Lawrence for allowing us to put these masterclasses on and to help you guys along with your sonar. I hope you got lots of value out of it. If you did, make sure you leave some comments. Let us know what you liked. Let us know if there's things you didn't like as well. We're always looking to improve. But Paul, for everything that you've shared today, I really want to thank you. It's been tremendous talking to you. It's been a great opportunity to help some people get onto some brim over the next couple of months. I'm sure that'll be well appreciated. So I'm going to let you be, mate. Folks, remember that we will be running another masterclass same time next week. We're going to be talking about, a bit more technical next week, we're going to be talking about transducers for the Simrad units. So if you're a Simrad owner or you're interested in finding out more about choosing the right transducer for your Simrad unit, then next week is the go. So 8 o'clock on Monday night. I'll see you then. Thanks again, Paul.
Thanks, Greg. Pleasure. See you guys.
Signing off. Bye for now, guys.